10 years ago, Ethan and Marcus sat in the same beat-up car, splitting a $5 meal, laughing about how broke they both were. Same age, same starting salary, $38,000 a year, same $0 in savings, same exact starting line. 10 years later, Marcus retired last month. He's 34 years old. Ethan is still working the same kind of job, still living paycheck to paycheck, still telling himself next year is the year things change. Here's what should bother you about that. Marcus didn't get a lucky break. No inheritance, no stock that mooned, no business that blew up overnight. If you go looking for the moment his life changed, you won't find one, because there wasn't one. What there was, instead, were 10 decisions, made in a specific order, over 10 years, that took two identical starting points and turned them into two completely different lives. I'm going to walk you through all 10 in the order they actually happened. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why one of them is done working and the other isn't. And it was never about the money they started with. Year 1. Same salary. Same rent, roughly, since they lived 4 blocks apart. Same temptations, a city full of things to spend a $38,000 salary on. Ethan's first year looked completely normal. A slightly nicer apartment than he needed. Because, why not? I just started working. A car payment on something reliable but newer. A few nights out a week with co-workers, because that's just what you do when you're 24. Marcus's first year looked almost identical from the outside. Same kind of apartment search, same car conversations, same nights out sometimes. The difference wasn't visible from the outside at all, and that's exactly the point. Nobody watching Marcus that year would have guessed anything was different. What was different happened inside his banking app on one specific day each month in about 90 seconds. Here's the decision Marcus made in his first month at the new job, before his first paycheck even landed. He calculated 20% of his take-home pay and set up an automatic transfer for the day after every payday. Not, I'll try to save. Not, whatever's left over. A number, a date, and an app doing it without him. 20% sounds aggressive when you're making $38,000. It wasn't comfortable. That's not an accident. It wasn't supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be automatic, because comfortable is the enemy of consistent. Here's the part almost nobody tells you about automating savings. After about 3 months, you stop noticing the missing 20%. Not because you get used to having less, because your brain recalibrates what normal spending money looks like based on what's actually sitting in the account you see. The $38,000 you're not seeing 20% of simply becomes, psychologically, an $30,400 salary. And people build entire, satisfying lives on $30,400 salaries every single day. Ethan's plan was to save whatever's left at the end of the month. If you've ever tried that, you already know what happened. Some months there was $50 left. Most months there was nothing. A few months there was negative something, quietly absorbed by a credit card. This isn't a willpower story. Spending expands to fill whatever's visible and available. That's not a character flaw. That's just how human brains handle money they can see. Marcus didn't have more willpower than Ethan. He removed the moment where willpower was even required. By the end of year 1, Marcus had $7,680 saved. Ethan had $310 and a credit card balance of $1,200. That gap, $7,680 versus effectively negative $890, happened in year 1, before either of them had a single big financial decision to make. It happened in 90 seconds, on one day a month, 12 times. Years 2 and 3 of this story look, from the outside, almost identical for both of them. Same kind of apartment, same kind of car. Neither of them living some dramatically different lifestyle. If you'd shown up at either of their birthday parties, you wouldn't have been able to guess which one was pulling ahead. That's exactly why this story matters, and exactly why most people miss what's actually happening in their own financial lives. The gap between Ethan and Marcus wasn't visible. It was compounding, quietly, in an account neither of their friends ever saw. End of year 2, they both got raises. Same company still, same department, same percentage, 12%. Same new salary, again, down to the dollar. Ethan's raise did what raises usually do. It quietly upgraded his life. A better apartment, slightly nicer everything. The raise, and then some, absorbed within about 2 months. Marcus did something different with his raise, and it's the second decision in this story. The rule Marcus followed: any time income goes up, only half the increase is allowed to raise his spending. The other half moves straight into savings, automatically, before he adjusts to having it. This isn't about deprivation. That's the part people get wrong. Half of the raise did go toward lifestyle. Marcus got the better apartment too, just a smaller upgrade than Ethan's. He wasn't punishing himself. He was making sure the raise didn't fully absorb into a new normal that would require the whole thing just to maintain. Run this forward and the math becomes almost unfair. Someone who banks half of every raise for a decade ends up with a 5, sometimes 6-figure gap versus someone on the identical salary trajectory who let their lifestyle rise in lockstep, same career, same raises. Two completely different outcomes, purely from what happened to the extra money in the moment it arrived. By the end of year 3, Marcus had $19,400 saved. Ethan had $890. He'd paid off the credit card from year 1 and started over roughly at 0. Year 4. They both needed a new car around the same time. Old ones finally gave out, almost within weeks of each other. Coincidence, or maybe just two identical cars from year 1 finally reaching the same mileage. Ethan found a car he loved for $520 a month. Marcus found a comparable one and asked himself a question first. Everything you finance costs you twice. The first cost is the payment. The second cost is what almost nobody calculates: insurance, maintenance, the loan interest itself, and what economists call opportunity cost, what that monthly payment could have become if it had gone somewhere else instead. Marcus ran the numbers before signing anything. A $520 payment isn't $520. Add insurance, add the inevitable repairs, add depreciation happening in the background whether you drive it or not, and the true monthly cost of Ethan's car turned out to be closer to $740. Marcus bought a car with a $310 payment instead. Reliable, unglamorous, 4 years old. The $430 monthly difference between his choice and Ethan's didn't disappear. It went into the same automatic transfer that had already been running for 3 years. Here's the number that should genuinely bother you. $430 a month, invested at a conservative historical market average over the remaining 6 years of this story, becomes over $40,000. From a car decision most people don't think twice about. By the end of year 4, Marcus had $34,900 saved and invested. Ethan had $2,100, and a car payment that would follow him for 5 more years. The text message: 1930 to 2100, year 5. Ethan saw a photo online, a mutual friend's new watch, a trip to somewhere warm, the kind of post that makes a Tuesday night feel like you're falling behind. He mentioned it to Marcus over dinner, feeling like everyone's doing better than me. Marcus knew something Ethan didn't. That same friend had over $30,000 in debt behind that photo. Marcus had heard it secondhand months earlier. Nobody posts the debt, only the trip. A huge amount of spending exists purely because of what other people appear to have. Social media made this worse than at any point in history. You're not comparing yourself to a neighbor anymore. You're comparing yourself to a curated highlight reel from thousands of people. many of whom are in debt to maintain the appearance you're envying. Marcus made a deliberate call, somewhere around this point in the story, to stop letting other people's visible spending set his bar. Not by judging anyone, just by recognizing that someone's external life is a genuinely poor predictor of their actual financial health. The person posting from the resort might be underwater. The person driving the 10-year-old car might have a $300,000 net worth. The only comparison that matters is between your spending today and your own goals for the future. Everyone else's highlight reel is irrelevant data. Every single time you're tempted to use it as a scoreboard. Year 5 is where this story stops being invisible. $34,900 growing at market return starts doing something. Ethan's $2,100 simply can't. It starts earning meaningful money on its own, without either of them doing anything. This is the part of compounding that feels like nothing for years and then, suddenly, doesn't. Marcus's account gained more from market growth alone in year 5 than Ethan managed to save from his entire paycheck that year. Nobody else could see this happening. Same apartment complex, roughly. Same kind of Friday nights. But one bank account had quietly crossed a threshold where money was starting to make money faster than either of them could earn it by working. Year 6. Ethan's second bedroom had become, without anyone deciding it should, a storage room. A treadmill turned clothes rack. Boxes from purchases he half remembered making. A kitchen gadget phase from a winter that felt like a decade ago. Marcus's spare room stayed nearly empty. Not because he bought fewer interesting things, but because of a rule that sounds almost too simple to matter. For every new non-essential item that entered Marcus's life, clothing, electronics, gear, something comparable left. Sold, donated, thrown out. No exceptions, no negotiating with himself in the moment. This does two things. First, it physically caps the slow accumulation of stuff that quietly costs money in storage nobody calculates. That treadmill-turned clothes rack takes up real square footage, and square footage costs real money every single year, whether you're using it or not. Second, and more important, the rule creates friction before every purchase. Am I willing to give something up for this? That tiny bit of friction is often enough to reveal whether you actually want something or just want the feeling of buying it. By the end of year 6, Marcus had $61,200. Ethan had $5,400, most of it from a bonus he hadn't gotten around to spending yet. Year 7. Ethan saw a jacket online at midnight, scrolling before bed. Bought it in under 2 minutes. It arrived, got worn twice, and joined a closet with 2 other things almost exactly like it. Marcus wanted something that same month too. He's not immune to impulse, nobody is. But it didn't go in a cart, it went somewhere else first. This is the rule that changes the most money for the least effort. Anything over a threshold that stings a little, Marcus used $100, goes on a list instead of in the cart. Not forbidden. Delayed 30 days. Here's what actually happens. Somewhere around 60 to 70% of what lands on that list, you'll look at again in 30 days and feel nothing. The desire evaporates because it was never really about the object. It was about a feeling in a specific moment, usually boredom, stress, or a bad scroll. The remaining 30 to 40%, you still want it, and now you buy it completely guilt-free because you've proven to yourself it wasn't impulse. This one rule by itself can cut discretionary spending by a quarter or more, not through deprivation, through filtering out purchases that were never really yours. They belong to a 30-second mood, not to you. Year 8. Ethan's car needed a $900 transmission repair. He didn't have it. It went on a card, joining a balance that had quietly grown back over the years. Marcus's water heater failed the same month, a $1,100 repair completely out of nowhere. He transferred the money and didn't think about it again by the weekend. Same size shock, almost exactly. Completely different experience of it. Most financial stress doesn't come from not having enough money. It comes from not having any margin, the gap between what comes in and what's required to go out. When your spending requires 95 to 100% of your income to function, every unexpected expense becomes a small crisis. Which bill gets delayed? Which card absorbs it? Which month becomes the tight month? That stress compounds. Stressed people make worse decisions, which creates more stress, which creates worse decisions. By year 8, Marcus had built what amounted to over a year of expenses in accessible savings, separate from his investments. That fund wasn't about buying anything. It was about buying the absence of panic. A $1,100 repair being an inconvenience instead of a catastrophe. By the end of year 8, Marcus had $98,700. Ethan had $3,900 and a car repair now sitting on a credit card at 22% interest. Somewhere around year 8, Marcus started asking a different question before almost any non-essential purchase. Not, what does this cost? But what will this cost me per use? Based on how I actually behave, not how I hope I'll behave. A $300 jacket worn 50 times a year for 5 years costs $1.20 per wear. A $40 jacket worn 3 times before it falls apart costs $13.33 per wear. The expensive jacket, mathematically, was the cheaper decision. But almost nobody calculates it that way, because the price tag hijacks the conversation before the math even starts. This cuts both ways. That home gym equipment that cost $650 and got used 4 times before becoming a coat rack? That's over $160 per use. You could have kept the gym membership for years for less than that. Ethan's spending, looked at through this lens, was full of purchases that made sense in the store and fell apart under the math. Marcus's 5-second mental calculation before every purchase over $50, realistically, how many times will I use this, quietly filtered out the purchases that were never really worth what they cost. By year 9, this single habit, compounded across a decade of purchases, had likely saved Marcus more than any single big decision in this story. Not because any one purchase mattered much on its own, because none of them were wasted. Here's what would surprise Ethan if he ever saw Marcus's bank statement. Marcus spent money on things that didn't matter, on purpose, every single month. A trip, a nice dinner, something completely impractical he just wanted. This is the part almost nobody expects, and it's the reason everything above actually lasted 9 years instead of collapsing in year 2. None of the rules before this one work if they feel like permanent deprivation. That always backfires eventually, usually in one large, regret-soaked binge that undoes years of progress in a matter of weeks. Marcus budgeted a specific guilt-free amount every month for pure enjoyment. No justification required, no per-use math, no 30-day wait. It was small relative to his income, but it was real, and it was spent without a single ounce of guilt, because it was planned for in advance. This is the difference between restriction and intention. Restriction always breaks, eventually, for everyone. Intention, with a built-in permission slip, lasts for a decade, which is exactly how long this actually needed to work. Last month, Marcus did the math he'd been quietly running for years and realized something. His investments alone, growing on their own, now covered more than his actual living expenses. Working had become optional. He called Ethan to tell him. Not to brag, to explain finally what had actually been happening for 10 years in an account Ethan had never once asked about. 10 years. Same starting salary, same starting line, down to the dollar and the cracked vinyl seats of the same car. The only difference between Marcus and Ethan was never luck, and it was never talent. It was a set of small, repeatable decisions made in a specific order, compounding quietly, every single month, into 2 completely different lives. Go back to the beginning of this video. 2 friends, $0, the real difference between them was one question, asked before almost every dollar left his hands, not, can I afford this? But is this actually worth what it really costs me? You don't need Marcus's exact salary or Marcus's exact 10 years to start closing this gap. You need his question, starting with the next dollar you're about to spend. If this changed how you think about your own 10 years from now, subscribe. I break down exactly this kind of financial psychology every week.